Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting of the Police and Crime Committee on the 21st of June to be signed by me as a committee record. And 4, summary list of actions. Ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the committee as listed in the report. Thank you. And 5, can I ask the committee to note the recent action taken by me following consultation, namely to agree the summary of the committee's work undertaken in the 16-17 year, and can we note the report? Thank you very much. Right, we now get to the main part of the morning. Again, welcome very much Sophie and the Commissioner. We're going to slightly change the agenda items and we're going to move Notting Hill towards the end of the agenda. We had a very good informal briefing yesterday morning that some members benefited from. So we'll ask some questions around that later, but there are some pressing matters for Londoners that we thought we'd bring up the agenda, and hopefully you're happy with that. So, on that note, the first set of questions we've got is regarding something that clearly is right at the top of priorities, which is Grenfell Tower fire, and I think Andrew will be leading the questions on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Craig, I mean, obviously, I think we all pay tribute to the professionalism and courage of your officers and indeed the other emergency services at the incident. Could I begin by asking you to outline where we've got to with the recovery process of the fatalities and what particular obstacles and difficulties your teams may be facing?
Thank you, and thank you for those comments at the start. I'd certainly echo those comments. I'd also echo those comments in relation to many of the communities and the remarkable resilience they've shown. I think we're absolutely clear the investigation around Grenfell is absolutely a priority for us. Every officer who works on this sort of investigation wants to find answers for families. That's what's motivating people. That's what's driving them in terms of the work they're doing. You'll remember and many people remember the incident vividly, and then this debate around the actual amount of fatalities. And when I talk about numbers, I'm very conscious as we go through this morning, whilst we talk in numbers, in quite large numbers, each and every one of these are people with families and friends, and I don't do it in any way that's disrespectful at all. It's to help illustrate. From the work we've done post the incident, we assessed that there were 350 people living in Grenfell Tower. That's based on the 255 who escaped, 14 who were not at home that night for whatever reason, and the figure we've used of 80 people dead or missing who we must presume are dead. And I think we've spoken about this before, but we know we've spoken to at least one person from 106 of the flats. The sad reality of the 23 flats that are left, we've spoken to no one in those flats. So we must presume people have died and lost their lives in there. This is one of the most complex recovery operations, certainly many of us in the UK have seen in time. And the people we're taking advice from, which gives you an idea of the scale and complexity of it, are some of the people who worked on 9/11 and the fall of the towers in 9/11. Because it is an extraordinary size of crime scene and extraordinarily complex. And without wanting to be too graphic, but I hope it helps explain from what we've seen and what some of the experts are telling us, that the fire in some parts of that building burned for at over 1,000 degrees for a considerable period of time. So we are now working through floor by floor, and it is literally a case of sifting and working through the debris, the remains, to try and desperately identify, sadly, parts of people so we can reunite. As of last night, we'd identified 39 people directly from what we've done. That work continues. It's about, and it's an estimate, there's about 15 tonnes of material on each floor to work through, and we think we'll be working through probably up until Christmas time in terms of working through that scene, gathering all the evidence, and as I say, at its absolute heart is trying to return and give certainty to those families affected. Now, it's, as you know, alongside this, we have an investigation running that's looking at the full range of the criminal law in relation to what may or may not have taken place both on that night and the building. We have a number of officers working on that investigation in terms of the work going on, and we've begun the process of gathering material, seizing material, and bringing material into that investigation. It's probably going to be one of the largest and most complex investigations in our history. We're also will obviously work alongside the public inquiry in terms of that. And as I say, we will work through looking at all the material recover and then look and see where the evidence takes us in terms of that. And if I can give you an example of the size of it, there's been a lot of talk about individual companies and organisations. At the moment, there's about 60 companies and organisations around that block and everything around it. From one alone, we've got 4 terabytes of data. For those not au fait with that, that's 20 million boxes of A4 paper. So some of you will have seen this week some of the challenges around things like disclosure. You can't just look at a box with X number of paper or a file with X number of attachments in it and say, well, that's all right, we don't need to look at that one. You actually have to look and see what's in them. So it gives you an idea of the size and scale of the job as we work through. And that's not uncommon now. We've spoken in relation to other questions here before around some of the challenges of digital data. That's not to negate the work, it's just to say how complex it will be. So we're working through witness statements from all those who survived, all those who were there on the night, the police officers who were there on the night, the firefighters who were there on the night. And like you, as you started the question, I just never cease to be humbled by some of the individual acts you hear both members of the public did, certainly London's firefighters and the other emergency services.
Well, thanks for that overview, Craig. A few specifics. You talked about 350 people in the tower. How robust do you think that figure now is?
Well, it's as robust from everything we know at the moment in terms of what we've got. So how that's been arrived at, as you know, there have been a whole range of both things you recognise as normal databases, everything from what local authorities hold, was all the way through to even looking at things like fast food delivery records. We've done all sorts of things to try and ascertain who is there at that particular time. We have some anecdotal information from contacts in the local community that there were other people in the tower who were out. And I know Martin and others have made this appeal before, and I'd just repeat it. We are not interested in immigration and subletting issues. Please just let us know if you were there, tell us, and we can reconcile the various databases we've got. So it's as accurate as we've got at the moment, and the team are not expecting that to move much at all.
Well, thanks for that. I mean, I know the government have said they're not interested in immigration status and so forth, and that's an important message to get over, yes. But inevitably people are going to be suspicious. No, I'm not naive. People are absolutely are worried, and at a time when people don't necessarily have complete faith, that I know people are worried. Just giving that reassurance, we are not. That's not what we're here for. You say you've identified 39 victims so far. Are there any human remains that you've removed who have not yet been identified?
I don't know the answer to that. I can find out for you if that's in the public domain.
Well, it'd just be useful to know, I think, if the reason people are saying, why is it taking so long, it's because you haven't actually recovered the remains, or the remains have been recovered and have been proved difficult to identify. It will probably be a mixture of both with that level of material. If you can imagine at 15 tonnes hand sieving, over 15 tonnes of floor of hand sieving, that's a considerable period of time. We're working with everyone you'd expect to see. There's anthropologists, orthodontists, you name it. We have people working on that in terms of the specialisms. And as I say, the role of disaster victim identification, we use a terrible shorthand of DVI, is actually something that UK policing has built up a level of knowledge in over a number of years to be able to access specialists to help us in this. But so the only comparable advice we can find particularly is around the challenge that was 9/11. Mm-hmm. Okay. How far up the tower have your teams been able to get? I don't have the exact floor. I can get that for you. I think that'd be useful as well. Could I move on to the criminal investigation? You've said quite clearly you've seized a lot of digital records and presumably paper records as well. How many interviews have you conducted? I've got details of witness statements. Yeah. I wouldn't have expected, and this is where I've got to be really careful, you might interview a witness. Yeah. Can I assume in your question you're talking about interviews of people who may have a different status?
I don't have the numbers of that at the moment. I wouldn't expect at this stage in the investigation, when you look at that volume of material, you'll be getting to that very quickly.
Well, the question was going to be how many interviews under caution have you conducted?
Right. Well, I haven't got that, so but at this stage in an investigation, I'd be very surprised if you were in a position to assimilate all of that data, understand it, understand the involvement of an individual, and then interview them under caution at this point. That would be quite some.
Yeah. How many officers have you got working on the investigation?
We've got, so across the piece, there's about 200 officers, but some of those are in the disaster victim identification. I've got a breakdown for you, and perhaps if I circulate that for you, I can tell you who's doing what in which part of the,
That would be helpful. And obviously, there's a lot of pressure from the community about getting on with the criminal investigation, and you've, which I'm sure you appreciate.
Absolutely.
When do you think you'll be in a position to say whether or not there will be arrests and interviews into caution or not?
I would be guessing if I did that for you. There's an investigation team on that. I'm not going to speculate. I genuinely don't know what will be in that data. And sometimes investigations that seem like they're going, you can come to, let's do a hypothetical. It's probably easier if I do a hypothetical. You could come to something very early in the disclosure process that you realise an investigation's taking a different turn. There is something in a disclosure process that you go, actually, I've really found something here, and I need to move very, very quickly now to X or Y. Or it could be a much more stage. It will entirely depend, as you gather that information, piece together the 250-odd survivor witness interviews, probably 600 plus firefighter witness interviews, 300 police officers, others, material from everyone. Once you piece that together, you then start to hone down on who you need to interview and who you need to see. So I wouldn't tie the investigation to a timescale. I think you'll be pretty much clearer on that come the autumn. Finish the block, and the interview's going. The investigation is running in parallel alongside that.
So come the autumn, you'll have a better idea.
I can give you a better, clearer picture.
Well, I think that'd be helpful. You mentioned the experts you've got helping with the identification of remains.
Yeah.
What other technical experts have you engaged to assist in the criminal investigation side?
So I know the team have been working with a number of people around both fire safety and a range of organisations around that, and it will change, it will literally change as they go through the investigation. So at various times they're going to need colleagues and obviously independent advice around fire, around building materials. All of those specialists will come in as they're needed in the investigation. I don't have a list of who they are, but they are working with the team.
Okay, well, it'd be helpful if we could have those details as well. I think that would help reassure people as well
Yep.
that the technical sides are being looked at as well. And the last question is, how does your criminal investigation relate to the public inquiry? In other words, will your criminal investigation hold up the public inquiry or vice versa, or are they completely independent?
Well, in theory, they're completely independent. Obviously, at the edges, there is always a read over between the two. And probably, because I obviously can't speak for the judge chairing the public inquiry, but if you look at the experience of other public inquiries, and depends on the timescale and starting, they can do bits sort of in parallel as it's going along. You don't have to wait for everything to finish, but there are clearly parts of it, particularly if you get to an issue around suspects or behaviour, that sort of thing, where you've literally got to wait for the criminal investigation to finish. So those are the debates that have started already in terms of the work about how do you run the two things in parallel.
Okay. And are you doing the investigation work for the public inquiry as well as the criminal investigation?
Ours is the criminal investigation. It's then entirely in the gift of the public inquiry whether they want to use that or whether they want to look at other things and take evidence from other people. That's clearly a freedom for the public inquiry.
So the material that you've collected for the criminal investigation, will that be made available to the public inquiry, or have they got to do their own?
No, it absolutely can be. It literally, I mean, it gets quite technical, depends on the rules of the public inquiry, depends on the nature of the documentation, whole range of things. As a general principle, yes, absolutely, it's there and available.
So there's no restriction of the pace or anything else that would stop you?
No restriction. You could have some stuff that might be legal privilege at its margins, but I'd be guessing, really. You know, you have to go. All you have to do is go through a proper process with the public inquiry about what's disclosed, why it's disclosed, and then it's disclosed. It's not a case of, and as you see with other public inquiries, it's not a case of us sitting and hanging on to stuff. So that's not what we're there for.
So the 4 terabytes will go to the judge if he wants them?
If they need them, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Deputy Mayor, did you want to add anything briefly to Deputy Commissioner's comments?
I don't have anything of detail to add.
Just thought I'd give you the opportunity.
To be absolute tribute to the emergency services, particularly the fire service on the day. But also, I just think it is important to remember that, you've asked the question about how many officers are involved in the inquiry and the investigation, to remember that there significant resources are being are on this and will remain on this for months and years to come.
Okay, thank you. And again, the committee would echo appreciation of the work that's going into it and the complications and the implications of that work.
So, one last question. I think it's in the public domain that you've said that the recovery process is going to take to the end of the year. Is that still your estimate?
Yes.
Okay. Again, thank you for that. Obviously, we'll be talking to you further in the autumn and looking at that as you suggested earlier. So thank you again for that. Now we're going to, as I said earlier, move Notting Hill slightly further down the agenda. And we're going to turn now to the Mayor's knife crime strategy, which has been published recently in the context of knife crime growing significantly over the last couple of years. So I've got some questions around that. Initially, I think, Susan, you're leading on that.
Yes, thank you. The strategy sets out a great deal of what we already know about knife crime, but the nighttime economy has been highlighted in the strategy as a possible link. So what will MOPAC be doing to analyse whether this is actually the case?
We'll continue, in terms of the strategy, we'll continue that analysis and looking at where there is violence and what is driving that. We also have in place the information sharing to tackle violence, which is in nearly every accident and emergency unit, which actually analyses where people are, where violence is happening, and to enable local strategic tasking. So that's part of the analysis that will continue, but it's also part of the analysis around the nighttime economy. And I'm working closely, as do the Met, with Amy LeMay, the nighttime czar, to look at how we can make the nighttime economy and visitors, staff, and those going out just safer.
Okay, I mean, what are you doing to look at other drivers that are causing knife crime? I mean, because clearly it's an increasing problem. What other methods are you using to find other reasons for it?
So, as part of the development of the knife crime strategy, we did quite extensive consultation around what is happening, in particular looking at talking to young people about what their views were, why some young people were in particular carrying knives, and what we could do to try to ensure that they didn't feel the need to tackle knives. That will continue. We're setting up alongside the Metropolitan Police as well, working together, continuing to talk to young people and look at those drivers. But the work that's in the strategy will continue in terms of looking at what is causing the violence, what can tackle the violence. We're working with schools in terms of tackling violence and looking at how we can work with families in looking at what's driving some young people to pick up knives and carry them.
Okay, thank you.
Assemblymember Pigeon has a question.
Yes, thank you. I've read the strategy. I really was keen to see this, but many of the commitments are just continuation of work already taking place. There's nothing revolutionary in this document. For example, you're expanding the use of safer schools officers, so every school in London will have access to a safer schools officer. Does this specifically mean more safer schools officers, or the existing ones will be spread over more schools?
So in terms of the strategy, I make no apology for the fact that it actually looks at what has been working and has commitments within it to continue what works, because there is no, and you know this, and your own report has said this, there is no one solution that's going to absolutely drive down knife crime. That means it's not just, as we set out in the strategy, police can't tackle this alone. We have to be in partnership with schools, with families and communities. So yes, there is that continuation of what is working already, but there's also the amplification of that as well. We are putting more, investing extra money and resources into tackling knife crime, and that includes also increasing the amount of resource and investment that's going into supporting victims of knife crime. So yes, there is a continuation, there's an amplification, but there is new elements in there. We've been told, and part of the consultation was very much, we need to help communities to work and tackle knife crime themselves and support and empower them. Within the knife crime strategy, we're investing in seed funding to enable local community groups that want to tackle knife crime and can tackle knife crime to start up and do that work. In terms of the Safer Schools officers, we are committed, and as are the Metropolitan Police, to increasing the actual number of Safer Schools officers so that we can increase the reach of Safer Schools officers increase the number of secondary schools, working with primary schools, and also to continue to work it within the pupil referral units as well.
Okay, so how many do you currently have Safer Schools officers and how many are you going to get to?
There are 300 Safer Schools officers at the moment. The commitment is to increase the number of Safer Schools officers. We're a little bit dependent on that, as I'm sure we'll get to this at some point today. We're a bit dependent on that around what happens with the budget, what happens with funding. We are committed to prioritising that, but it does mean at the moment I can't put a number on that.
You haven't got a target. Okay. Now you said amplification in areas in here, there are some new elements. So what does this strategy do that wasn't happening before?
I've already talked about the seed funding and empowering communities that wasn't happening before. In terms of looking to work with schools, there is a significant work that will be taking place in working with schools and families. We'll be launching in the autumn a campaign, a media campaign to get through to those young people who are carrying knives, who are at risk of pick up knives. That will be a new campaign to really target those. My view is that if I see it on the social media I look at or the media I look at, it's not necessarily getting to the right places. So I hope you will see it. We will definitely brief you about it if that would be helpful to you about how it has been targeted. But my view, it has to be quite a sophisticated campaign to really get through to the areas and people that are really at risk around that. The other thing that I think is significantly new in this strategy is the work that we have done around the criminal justice system and the criminal justice service, the work we've done with the Youth Justice Board, the courts, and probation to really look at what is happening, and there's a continuation of that so that we can really understand what sentencing, what the outcomes around arrests, what those outcomes are, what works, and to be looking at actually what is happening to young people. There has been a significant gap in that information and that understanding, and this strategy and part of the consultation around the strategy is going to be putting that right. We are also looking at what we can do around ensuring there are better community sentences for those where it is appropriate, and looking at what we can do around tagging and electronic monitoring. That is new within this strategy, and I think could make a significant difference.
And are some of these initiatives, have they actually proven to work elsewhere?
We've looked across the country around good practice. Some of this is development of good practice within London, and we're always looking at good practice across the country.
Is there anything, maybe actually to the Deputy Commissioner, is there anything that you would have liked to have seen in the strategy that is missing or doesn't go far enough?
No, I don't think so. I think we've spoken before about this. I was impressed with the consultation process and the way the strategy was developed. I think in the sort of the principle of your question suggests some of the challenges. I don't think there is if there is a new magic solution, I don't think I've seen it yet, and I didn't see it during the consultation. I think the message I took from that consultation, the message I took from talking to people, is the consistent application of these things in a system way. It does have a long-term benefit and a long-term effect. So get the work around, pursue, if you like, the stuff we can do, the interventions, the arrests, the high-end stuff, right. Have proper channels for people when you can divert people. Have programmes that look at, I don't like the phrase education, information probably is a better way of talking about it, that inform people and allow people to make choices, all the way through to some of the debates we're starting to have. So we've spoken here before around the need to take down video content online that relates to extremism or terrorism. How do we get that across into ones that glorify either gang behaviour, possession of knives and those sorts of things? How do we get companies to be as serious about that as they're starting to be around terrorism. So I think that the strategy's got all the parts now. I think the challenge for us collectively, that you rightly say, we've got to deliver it, and we've got to deliver this in a consistent way. I think what I've learned over a number of years, the sad reality is, once your focus shifts away from this, it pops back up.
But the last point you make is very interesting, because my reading of the strategy, it does not cover the impact social media has on the increase in knife crime, the idea of these videos online that are encouraging young people, that also show that if you have an altercation with another gang, it's going to be broadcast widely. That isn't addressed at all in this strategy, even doing research into it. The other area that I'm concerned about, and perhaps the Deputy Mayor can respond to, the Evening Standard has run a really powerful series of articles, and one of them talking to a former gang member in July. He talked about a very interesting area about young people coming here in the last 10 years. To quote him, in the last 10 years since Somalis and Congolese came to London, they taught us a whole new level of violence. Is there anything you're doing research looking at how people who've come from war-torn countries, seen absolute horrors, have come here and perhaps got involved in gangs and upped the violence level? Is that some work you're doing? It's not mentioned at all in the strategy.
So in relation to your comments about social media, I think it is in the strategy, in looking at what the responsibilities of the internet company, Google and Facebook are, and the Deputy Commissioner has already talked about that today in terms of looking and making sure that they take their responsibilities seriously, and around YouTube as well, in taking down material that is actually taking down the material that's actually making an impact on violence. I know, and you know, that if you look around Facebook, you can see videos and films that are actually, egging people on to cause violence. That is in the strategy around social media, and we are already talking to Google about that, and we'll continue to talk to them about that. There's also issues around some of the sharing of those films, so it's actually creating a little bit of money for those that put it up. And we're having those conversations to really start to tackle that. So I don't accept your premise that the strategy does not look at social media, because I think it does. In relation to the issues around what is driving higher levels of violence, we're very clear in the strategy that we're taking, as part of this, there is the trauma-informed approach, and that is around understanding what is driving some young people, and whether they're new arrivals or not, to commit some really, really significant crime, and the impact it has is so terrible. So that is in the strategy, and that will continue to be in the strategy. And we've been discussing that work with mental health trusts and with the consultants in hospitals as to how that can be taken forward.
Okay, I think it needs something more specific around that, given that young people who've been involved in this have actually commented on that, and that was not something I had ever picked up before. You talked about the sharing of information, something I have long gone on about. There are still 3 A&E departments in London who don't share data. When will they be sharing data?
So the last time I looked at this, there was one A&E department. I can double check that was not sharing, that was not up and running. And my understanding that was not an issue, that they wasn't because they did not want to. There were some technical barriers, but I'll have to go back and look at exactly what the issues are around that one A&E department. I think there's 29 in London, and 28 of them are sharing that data.
Okay, thank you for that. How are you going to reach young people with this new media campaign, your prevention campaign, and who's going to deliver that?
We are out to, I'm not the person to be able to give those solutions. I do not have that expertise at all, and I think we have also recognised that expertise lies outside of City Hall, so we have actually gone out and put a tender out to get the right people who do understand how to to get messages through to young people. That's out there at the moment. We've not yet had anything back. We are asking the experts on that.
And then when you have that, you'll be able to brief us on what the campaign's going to be and how you're going to engage. Yep. That's great, thank you. I wanted to also ask just about, and I did try this at the plenary, but I didn't quite get the answer, is you're talking here about every borough developing their own knife crime strategy. How are you going to do that, and how are you going to make sure it's not a top-down approach, as many of us felt was some of your recent target setting? How are you going to engage the whole community in setting that strategy?
Is that one first? Do you want me to?
Either of you.
I mean, these are plans that the borough commanders, alongside their stakeholders in the boroughs, are developing, and is being overseen through the Metropolitan Police. We are expecting them to do that engagement around local community groups and stakeholders, and very much the crime fighting. I attended one of the crime fighters that had knife crime on, as a priority on the agenda, as it often does. It probably always does, and the very clear message that was going out to borough commanders was, policing enforcement is absolutely part of the action plan, but you need to have as part of your action plan, what work are you doing with schools, how are you getting the messages out, and how are you working with communities. So that very much is part of the principles of that development of those plans.
Okay, that's good to hear. Perhaps as Deputy Commissioner, is there any specific evidence where there has been a knife attack, a knife incident, that young people in that area then are more inclined to carry a weapon because they fear for their safety? And if so, what are you doing to try and tackle that?
There may be evidence I've not seen. So empirical evidence, could I show you it now? No, I couldn't, in terms of doing it. What you do see, and we've talked about this before, is that there are knife crime hotspots where it tends to cluster, which would suggest there's something that, and it can be as simple, if I think in one borough, it's an issue around the nighttime economy. In another borough, it's where transport infrastructure meets. So if we take Croydon, we often talk about Croydon, the issue around transport and lots of people coming together. So if you look at the action plan for Croydon, a lot of the knife crime action for Croydon is around sort of 3:30 in the afternoon till 8 o'clock in the evening. That's one of the pinch points in terms of time, and particularly around young people and schools. In another borough, the profile will be quite different. And as the Deputy Mayor said, that's why these action plans are borough-based in terms of doing it, so you can actually address those issues on the borough. Because one of the challenges, and your point is well made about, is it top-down? Do we drive it from the top? And it's a bit of both, if I'm honest, as it always is with these things. So there is a lot coming up that meets in the middle. It meets in the middle about the borough level in terms of knitting it together. But it's not a case with this that you can say, if we do a tactic, we make it up in the yard and say all the 32 London boroughs do that. In some boroughs it would have no impact. So it is very much about particular things for particular areas. There was some work with gangs done a few years ago by Home Office Research. We looked at some of the what works. I've not seen the detail, it may be there, about what actually works around knife crime and whether there's a causal effect. Anecdotally, young people are saying that. So and if you think if it affects and impacts on the safety of someone, do they make a different choice? That's probably one of those sort of, if you timeline the issues around knife crime, that's probably one of those critical intervention points. And what we hope with the work around schools, at the point there is something that happened, if you look at the last sector week, I think we did about well over 150 schools in terms of inputs, and it's getting those inputs in at the right time.
And just one of the specific things in here is about A&E departments and the youth workers in there. You say you're going to extend support. There's no time frame, any detail. Is there any more detail around that you could provide?
We're working that up at the moment in terms of the budgets, and our budget, we will be extending it and be able to let you know in terms of how many other accidents. We are not going to get to the point where every accident emergency unit has this support, because we just have the capacity. We'll have to prioritise those accident emergency units where they are probably in the hotspot areas. There are obviously the 4 trauma units already have them, but we'll be prioritising those.
Okay, and is this a consultation document, or is this the final strategy?
That is the strategy.
So it's not clear.
That is the strategy. We'll be developing an action plan and overseeing that action plan.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I'm having some sight of the Croydon strategy. I've been quite taken by the breadth of the partnership working, the media aspect, and particularly working with young people and their families. So I'm quite impressed with that work in progress, I have to say.
Thank you.
Sorry, Sean, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, if I could go back to schools and safer schools officers. As I understand it, you are running a pilot whole school scheme in Croydon, which I was interested to hear about, and your strategy talks about something called a Safer Schools Standard, which is described as allowing schools to evidence that they meet best practice around student safety. So I wanted to ask a bit more about that. Is it an educational standard, or is it to do with mainly security, and how does it work with the Safer Schools with the school pilot, and when will we see the results of that? Is that going to be rolled out?
The commitment is to develop that Safer Schools standard. It was actually came out of the result of one of the consultation sessions that we held, talking to schools, and it was and pupil referral units. Who one of the schools said to us, we have standards for healthy schools. Why don't we have a standard for a safer school? So that because we recognise that some schools don't wish to put their hands up and say we have a problem because they're worried about some of the reputation and possible stigma that attaches. We were trying to turn that round and saying, actually, many parents, and you should be proud that you are keeping your children safe and you are putting the right things in place to keep your young people safe. And that's what that is about. We're developing it. We're setting out to develop it at the moment. It came out of the consultation, but we're also going to be part of that consultation. Also, we discussed with Ofsted. What are they doing as part of their inspection framework? Do they ask the question, how do you know your young people are safe? How do you know if your young people are carrying knives? We are continuing to discuss that with Ofsted. I hope that they will put that into their inspection framework as part of their safeguarding. They have very good framework for safeguarding. I think they should have specifics around violence and knife crime as well.
But just to reiterate my question, though, that this is about educational work that the school is doing around safety, around crime and violence, not just about security measures.
Yes, we're going to develop the criteria. Healthy schools criteria is not just about the food on the plate, it's also about education. So I can see it being both. Okay, and the Croydon pilot? The Croydon pilot, we're in the, I think we're just about to go out to tender for the second phase of the Croydon pilot. It was a proof of concept. It was the beginning of it in Croydon, and we either have or are about to go out to tender for the second part of that, and that will be continuing. We've committed the resources to that over the next, I think, 3 years or 2 or 3 years, and we're going to continue that. You're going to pilot it for 3 years before you roll it out? Sorry, no, it's not. Well, it's there, and we'll take the learning from it, and we intend to see what learning is coming through all the time. We're not going to just set it off and not look at it for over the years. So, but we are, it is a whole school. It's a whole school program. It's a different way of working, and I went down to the school in the initial phases of it, and it's. What I was really impressed by was the commitment, not just of the staff and the teachers, but the real commitment of the young people and the excitement of the young people, and how important they thought it was to not just be talking within the schools, but also working with the families. Okay, thank you. And then on the the prevention, the education campaign you talked about that's launching in the autumn, I'm assuming that within the brief of that there will be, this must be done without increasing fear amongst young people. This will be an absolutely key part of we'll have to keep it, absolutely. We don't, because that would be counterproductive, because as we've already we've discussed on many occasions that actually young people are saying to us that they don't feel safe, and that is why they are carrying a knife. So we have to do it in a way that is not counterproductive. Okay, and will it be integrated with, and the learnings from that and the messages from that, will that be integrated with the communications around Operation Sceptre? Because that's being done more often now. I'm seeing, again, obviously this is social media I see, but I'm seeing again more and more pictures of knives, of weapons on social media, on television. There was a table full of knives the other day on the BBC that was terrifying. How are we going to make sure that different parts of police communications are integrated together in this respect? It's not just this part of the knife crime strategy that will be integrated. The whole of this knife crime strategy is an integrated strategy. We will and continue to have them regular meetings to ensure that it is integrated, because there is no, again, around the counter, you know, you don't want one part doing something that is counterproductive or not in, you know, not in liaison or working together. So the whole of this strategy is integrated in that way. And that includes the communications, that you will include the enforcement activity with the Metropolitan Police as well.
Okay, that's very good to know. And obviously we'll talk a little bit more later on about acid attacks,
Yeah.
but hopefully the research and learning that goes into developing the campaign will look at whether a focus on weapons is actually the right thing to do, whether a focus on violence might be better, because then that incorporates all kinds of uses of weapons.
Yes, and we did say in the strategy that this is, you know, focusing obviously on knives, but in part of the strategy says that we will continue, and acid attacks are very, you know, very high profile at the moment and very worrying, and it does say that we will continue to look at where there are other weapons being used and what we need to do around that. The strategy does also look to actually, it's around the drivers, isn't it, and what we've been talking about, drivers. The strategy, part of the strategy is to tackle the propensity to violence. So I think in the short and medium and longer term that the strategy will have an effect on other forms of violence and other weapons, because we're actually trying to get to the root of some of the causes of it.
Yeah, okay, great. We don't want to simply divert to another weapon of choice. That would be a really waste of time. So moving on to the goals and the delivery of the strategy. We've seen some, in the strategy itself, there are some, you know, goals for how you'll measure progress. But is there an implementation plan where we can measure and monitor the progress in delivery of the things that it's supposed to be doing?
Well, we were developing an action plan, and that will be monitored, and effectiveness. I think, you know, ultimately the effectiveness of this strategy is going to have to be reductions in knife crime, and you, us, and everybody will be monitoring that on a regular basis, and monitoring it not just overall in London, but monitoring it borough by borough to understand what is working where, and to make sure that anywhere, you know, to spread good practice, but also to ensure that where there are some boroughs where there are emerging issues, that can be quickly got on top of.
But we will need targets to help us judge performance, won't we?
And we have set the overarching strategy as a reduction in under 25 knife crime. We haven't put a figure on that, but we are looking for reductions.
So you're not going to put a figure on it?
We haven't in the strategy, no.
Oh, sorry.
So in terms of, you've indicated in one of your previous answers that some of the things, the delivery of some of the things will depend on funding. So obviously you have short, medium and long-term goals, some of which are not funded yet. You don't know if you can deliver them. What are the short-term goals in terms of delivery that we should be keeping the closest eye on?
So in terms of the funding, that was in relation to Safer Schools officers, and not saying right now this is the number of extra Safer Schools officers that will be delivered, because we have to understand what the budgets can allow. It doesn't mean that there will be there will be an increase in Safer Schools officers. We're just not putting a target on that at the moment. In terms of the other aspects of the strategy, we have put the funding there, but from our point of view, around £7 million worth of funding around serious youth violence and knife crime is there. We have got the funding, and we have prioritised the funding around victim services. So for the first time, there will be victim support services for young people who have been a victim of knife attack, because at the moment, the only victim support that goes in, and quite rightly, obviously, it absolutely needs to go in, is when there's been a murder. And rightly, the families of murder victims get very, very good support. However, if you've been, if you are a victim, a young person who's been a victim of a knife crime, you're not getting the right support. There's we've increased that funding to £1 million to ensure that that victim support is there. Because, we talk about the drivers of crime, of violence. We know that often, not always, obviously, that where a young person has been a victim of crime, they can go on to be an offender as well, because of the violence and the trauma that, the difficulties that provides. So that is there. In terms of some other elements of that, we will continue in terms of the delivery. Some of the funding may mean that the amplification may not be as great, but we are doing that. Short term, I've already set out victim support, the extra money going in, seed funding, that's funded. So I don't want you to go away thinking we have not got the funding for this strategy. We know we've got the vast majority of the funding. My comments were specifically around the Safer Schools officers.
And your action plan will outline what things we can expect, when and which things are funded that we can monitor. Okay, thank you. Shall I move on to the next? The Mayor put out a very good press release. He's made specific reference to the closure of youth services. As you know, this is an issue I've worked on. I think we're up to at least £36 million taken out of youth services across London now since 2011. Can I ask the Deputy Commissioner what your view is on the impact of the closure of youth services on the challenges of engaging with young people and on youth crime?
Well, I mean, clearly decisions about what services in a particular area are issues for local authorities and for other partners, and I recognise some of the challenges they face around funding and the challenges. I mean, the reality for us operationally, and that's the only way I can really answer the question, is we need partners to work with on a local level who we can work with, who are effective. What sector they come from is really an issue for others. But if you're working, and we've heard a bit and spoken a little bit about Croydon's work and the partnership work, you need effective partnerships and reach to be able to do and deliver some of these things. We've spoken a lot before, and you asked the Deputy Mayor about some of the things that are being done initially. So the development of the individual borough plans, the work around SEPTA, that's all up and running, that's going. But we need other people to work with us to do the other parts of that process.
Okay, thank you very much. Deputy Mayor, you mentioned seed funding for community groups. There's a lot of community groups out there who need, I don't know what you might call it, resilience funding to keep going. They're already doing good work. Is that something you'll consider as well?
We can't step into the space that has been withdrawn, and you published a very good report around youth services and the money that local authorities have because of really difficult decisions that they've had to take out of youth services because of we know what the situation is in public service. We will continue to fund those organisations that we're working with in terms of voluntary groups around work that they're doing around the London gang exit. Some of the money that flows through the London Crime Prevention Fund flows out from the boroughs and working with the voluntary and community groups. But the specific commitment in this strategy is around seed funding to enable the community groups to get up and running, and then they will have to look at how they become sustainable.
Okay, and there was a call in the Mayor's statement for the government to step in and fill the gaps. One of the issues around youth services is that they're not a statutory service, so local authorities really do struggle. If no government money comes in, is there anything the Mayor can do to try to plug some of those gaps?
It is very difficult because, I think you said already about £34 million worth of funding has come out of youth service. Pardon? 37 million pounds. It is not going to be possible to step in and plug that gap. The real issue is to ensure that local authorities and the public services are so crucial to tackling knife crime, have the resources that they need, and that really is for the government to make sure that they provide that.
Is there anything this committee can do to help with that? I know the Mayor's written to the government. If we did the same, that would help to put the pressure on.
That would be extremely helpful to look at, in terms of not just youth services, but in particular the other issues that we have come across in terms of developing the strategy is around the mental health services and the absolute pressure that mental health services are under, the real difficulty to get appointments, to get young people to have the right level of support. I mean, we've had that in the papers recently. We need them to be able to provide the support and treatment for young people. It's not there because in the way that it should be because of the pressure that they're under.
I think there's a lot of evidence we've seen in previous reports which would back up something we did if we did that. Are you doing anything to work with other cities to increase the pressure on the government too? Presumably other cities are seeing the same kinds of issues.
We, as part of my role, I've been discussing with police and crime commissioners what the overall situation is around policing and crime, and we are working with them to put together submissions to the Home Office around budgets.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we appreciate very much that you're not able to step into the shoes of youth service provision for boroughs. I mean, that's absolutely correct. But I think it's right that you're supplying some targeted funding, particularly around the knife crime agenda. There are groups out there, not just existing groups, but I've been struck by emerging new groups, particularly parents, mums banding together to say, look, we're deeply unhappy about this, and we've got an excellent Chief Inspector, Craig Knight, down in Croydon doing the engagement stuff. We've got a meeting with some parents in a couple of weeks, and we certainly will be bidding towards the 625 extra funding for that. So that's to be welcomed, and it's not a special.
I think you need to declare
it's not a special
interest,
pleading.
yeah.
But, thank you. Right, turning to our next. Thank you. Our next. Oh, did you want to come in?
Can I, yes, just a very quick one, please. Deputy Mayor, do you not think it's important to actually have specific targets when you bring out a strategy like this?
We do have the target of reducing under 25 knife crime year on year. We're not going back to taking figures, out of the air and putting targets which can create perverse incentives around, but numbers which we have seen through reports from the HMIC have created, have not been welcome and have not provided the ability to really tackle the vulnerability that needs to be tackled. We have put targets, we know what the priorities are. There's a very, very clear direction of travel, and we will be assessing that.
You don't think just the word reducing is a bit wishy-washy?
I don't think it's wishy-washy. No, I do not.
Okay.
I mean, I have to say we disagree, and I disagree with you on that from a personal level. I feel the need for local communities to hold their local officers to account, for borough commanders to be held to account, and other lead officers. And only by having numerical targets, indicated performance targets, can I believe that we can do that properly. We will disagree on it, but I think that's a position that some of us hold.
I think in terms of holding absolutely the transparency and accountability, not just of the Metropolitan Police, but also of MOPAC, is
Indeed.
incredibly important. I do not think putting a numerical target enables that to happen in any significant or useful way, because local communities, safer neighbourhood boards, all have the dashboards, are trained on the dashboards, can see the figures going up and down. There is the accountability and the ability of the community, as well as the Safer Neighbourhood Board, to challenge and to hold us to account for that. It is there.
Okay. Well, we shall see. Right. Next set of questions. Clearly, I was going to say it's a new phenomenon. Clearly, acid attacks have been around in London as long as criminals have been around in London. However, we are seeing an alarming rise, particularly in the east of London. Unless you wanted to particularly lead on these questions.
Thank you, Chair. This debate quite rightly has acquired a sense of urgency over the last few days, particularly since the fire attacks in Hackney last Thursday. And on Monday, there was a parliamentary debate, and the Home Secretary has announced a review of various options. So I want to start off with you, Deputy Commissioner. I want to look at this issue in stages. The number of acid attacks, acid or acid-related attacks on Londoners is rising. Is this part of a national trend? And can you give us your thoughts? What do you know about these types of attacks? Who are the likely perpetrators and victims? And what sort of types of crime acid is used for? I want to come to specifics later, but if you can just get a general picture.
No, in 2016, 455 offences. That was up on 2015. And I think in the way you phrased the question, you put it in exactly the right way. That's acid or the use of a corrosive substance. I think there is some of the shorthand doesn't fit with what we actually see on the ground. So I think when we talk about acid attacks, we talk about those things we saw last week and we've seen before where someone's actually attacked with them. Only about 63% of the use of acid is in relation to assaults. 23% of it's around robbery, and the rest is around things like criminal damage. So I won't say people will be familiar with, but you'll have heard examples where someone pours acid or a similar corrosive subject over a vehicle. That will be included in those figures. So what do we know of them? about 80% of the victims and about 82% of the suspects are male. So it's predominantly a male pattern behaviour. East London is a hotspot in relation to the mapping of this, although there are offences right across London. As I say, about 23% of those offences we looked at in 2016 were personal robberies, with 63% linked to assault. About 30% of victims in 2016 were Asian, and the key victim group is 15 to 29 years of age. And we are seeing some links, although it has to be treated with caution because it's not a very big data set, a growing feature between named suspects in acid attacks who also feature on our gang matrix. So please don't read that as gangs have all moved lock, stock and barrel into acid, but we are seeing some move across. So we are seeing on our named suspects. So when we look at a crime sheet that's got a named suspect on and check it against the gang matrix, we are seeing some read across. Now, we have hypothesis for this. We have tests that we think, well, is it something around a focus on knives and knife crime sentencing? But there's no evidence to support this yet. That's just an emerging thing we're looking at. You mentioned the work that's going on in Parliament. We absolutely support the work and the debate in there. I think members will know it's the Metropolitan Police that's put forward a superintendent to work on this work nationally. And why are we doing it nationally? Because at the heart of your question, this is reflected across the country. We have seen acid attacks moving across the country.
You said that East London is a hotspot. Is there any particular reason?
No,
is it a case of more reporting? Because I've been asked this question by the media and by various other people. I mean, East London in that sense is no different to other parts of London. But yeah, the statistics do bear out your observation.
Yeah. I think everyone at the moment would be guessing if they tried to answer that question for you. So part of the work we're doing at a national level is what we can do with both colleagues in the NHS and elsewhere to better understand some of the things that lie behind this.
Although by way of reassurance, Chair, I think I should repeat what the Commissioner said in the Evening Standard last Thursday, that yes, this is a serious issue, and the statistics don't make for are depressing. Yeah. But these attacks don't happen all the time, all over London. Yeah. So yes, she said that. Yeah. So just moving on. Again, Deputy Commissioner, I was going to ask you, Sophie, about the knife crime strategy vis-a-vis acid attacks, but I think that the questions of Assembly Member Pigeon or Sean Perry have you already answered that aspect. So if I can concentrate on you, Deputy Commissioner, what would you like to see MOPAC and other partners do to help prevent attacks?
Well, I think colleagues in MOPAC, colleagues in the fires, so I'd separate that up. There's some initial response stuff. So when one of these things actually happens, we're working with colleagues in London Ambulance Service, the fire service, and our own staff around what the initial response is. And there's some really good work coming together there. There's then work with the NHS. So walking through the process, there's work with the NHS around the support people get and the support people get as victims of these. I don't need to emphasise to you, you've seen some of the horrific stories and pictures on television and the media. The impact this sort of attack has on people is extraordinary. Many of us have been unfortunate enough to see quite a bit of violent crime in our service, but actually, acid attacks are really extraordinary and strike at something quite horrific in people's psyche, certainly from the conversations I have. So working with victims commissioners and others in that sort of space. Then there's the work around prevention, where I think that has got to be done, as we're doing at the moment, nationally with colleagues from the Home Office. So looking at, is sentencing right? Should and I know some of the proposals that were discussed in the Commons debate about acid being in the same category as of offending and therefore sentencing as carrying a knife. The licensing of this, whether there's other ways you can restrict sales with age-restricted sales. Can you do trace activity based on particular... So I think we unusually have a sort of open door with many colleagues in both the legislative space and at local authorities who say, we want to work around this. I think we've just got to get on and do the work now.
I was actually going to come on to that point about what can the government focus on in this action plan. So you started talking about sentencing and about licensing. There's a particular issue with online sales. And as I understand, again, from the Evening Standard last Friday, suppliers are, if they have suspicions of, if they have any suspicions about particular sales, then the duty to sort of report
yes,
to the relevant authorities.
So some of that's looking to change in terms of what you can do. You'll be aware with the issue around knives. There's been a change in terms of purchase of knives online, in terms of how you actually collect them and what you do. I think there's some learning from that we can take across into this space around acid. We have to be careful, though, as I think you know, and I know the keen interest you've taken in this in your area. This is not just, I think when we talk about acid, people imagine a bottle that says sulfuric acid. This is some of the sort of industrial cleaners that people will find in their home. And so it's going to be quite complex getting that bit of legislation right. But I am absolutely confident that the right people are working around that at the moment.
I mean, much has been made of the fact that the legal difficulties here. But now, as I understand it, I mean, carrying a knife, you've got to have lawful authority or a reasonable excuse. I mean, what's the legal difficulties with making this that the same sort of basis for carrying acid or acid-related products?
I think that is one of the things that, as I said, that is one of the things they're actively looking at. Now, I don't work in the cleaning and industrial industry, but you can understand why some organisations, you would expect when you stop a vehicle, they may have acids or something in them. They may, if you're doing recovery, you may have batteries with battery acid. But other people shouldn't and won't. So they're looking at making, I know part of the stuff is looking at how the legislation and framework can work for the future to get to that sort of scenario. And then you look further down the line, so you get the legislation and framework in place, you look at things like sentencing guidelines, you look at the use of victim personal impact statements, where in an offence like this, a victim personal impact statement is absolutely critical.
Can I come in at this stage? My next question, and Sophie, you might wish to come in here as well. What is the current level of support offered to victims of acid attacks? I've written to the victim commissioner about this and what the thinking is in this field. But perhaps if I could have your thoughts, Deputy Commissioner, and yours as well, Sophie.
Yes, well, I mean, obviously, as with all victims of violent crime, they get the support of the officer and the investigation teams in terms of doing it. They get the victims' code compliance, i.e. telling people what's going on, explaining how we're going through the process. And the more serious the crime, so when you get up into grievous bodily harm, the more support and the longer that support will take place for.
We, MOPAC obviously commissions victim services across London, and part of that is, well, part of it, as Craig has set out, that is what is there. We are looking at those services around, how effective they are and in relation to victims of acid attacks, but we do commission those services already, so.
And I think I'll finish on this note, Chair, but the role of social media, I mean, one of the problems, I think, is the way that people put stuff on various blogs. I mean, I monitor some of the blogs in East London, but about 4 or 5 blogs in Tower Hamlets that I keep an eye on. And just this morning, someone, and I don't think there's any basis to this, said there's an acid attack on someone in a house in East Town. Someone pretending to be a delivery person knocked on the door and squirted acid over the woman who opened the door. Now, I mean, is there any way we can look at sort of putting out some positive messages? Because these are sort of rumours that I think causes anxieties, there's no control. It's very hard, obviously, to counter such messages. But I think so at a local level, and I've discussed this with various borough commanders in my part of London, as to how we can sort of give out positive messages, reassurance messages.
Well, I think that's a really good example. I mean, I'll speak to the borough commanders on that one, but that's the sort of thing where if that didn't happen, we get out on our Twitter feed, this didn't take place. It just didn't happen. Officers are out there. I saw one on the overnight logs last night where they'd arrested someone carrying a bottle with acid in. So they're out there doing it day in, day out. We are out there intervening, stopping and searching people, seizing stuff and making arrests.
And just to pick up on that point about reassurance, I think that is incredibly important, especially as in previous weeks, you know, there has been a lot of unease and fear amongst the Muslim community, Muslim women in particular. And we do need to get out those reassurance that actually, that, you know, report the crime. It will be taken incredibly seriously and action will be taken. I did write to all local London, all the leaders of local authorities the week, I think it was the week before last, around acid attacks, to put it into context, to say this is what's happening. Please, can you disseminate this information to to all your contacts, and ask people to make sure that they are reporting any of the attacks that are coming through. So absolutely take your point around. It's really important to get some messages about how serious this is and how seriously the police are taking this.
2 more points, Chair. I think it's important to put this on record. Regrettably, there's been a rise in hate crime, and also there's been a rise in acid and acid-related attacks. But there's no correlation between the two. I think the Mayor Sadiq Khan, was it at Mayor's question time of the plenary?
It was at the plenary,
went out of his way to emphasize this point. Over the last few months, over the last year, I think only two acid-related attacks have been treated as hate crimes.
Yes.
I think it's important to put that on record. There was something else, Chair, but I think...
I saw Tony first.
You've told us, Deputy Commissioner, about the impact of these crimes. Can you tell me something about the sanction detection rate?
I don't have that data in the exact form. What I do have is some data that relates to, I call it clear-ups in terms of that 455. It ran at just over 20% in 2016 for all of those crime types. So that's not just assaults.
There's quite a close analogy with that and the sanction detection rate for knife crime, isn't there? Which is around 20%.
Oh, different in different types of knife
well,
crime.
Well, indeed. The point I'm getting at, it does appear to be quite, how shall I put it, an easy offence to get away with.
But in those numbers, I go back to only 63% of those are assaults. Others are, so a criminal damage in the middle of the street in the night is actually really hard unless someone sees it or witnesses it.
Well, I'm looking because we only have substantive figures in relation to knife crime, and I'm looking at the figures where there is knife crime with injury as opposed to knife crime. And it does appear that the sanction detection rate is falling.
Sorry, are we on knife crime or corrosion?
I'm saying I don't have you. What I'm suggesting is that there is an analogy in terms of sanction detection rate for acid attack and for knife crime in general. You've drawn my attention to the fact that not all acid attack is an acid attack on the person, just as not all knife crime relates in injury.
Yeah,
and
I think
what I'm trying to suggest to you is that we're not terribly successful in clearing these matters up.
I'd like to be better. Gosh, yes, absolutely, I'd like to be better.
I'm sorry. Go on. You'd like it to be better, but in fact, it has been declining, the success rate in clearing these matters up, hasn't it?
We've got to be really careful here because we're quoting two different sets of figures.
Course.
And slightly. So the knife crime with injury figures and detection rate, by their nature, will always have injury.
Yes.
Some of these, we're talking about a pool of 455 crimes that are a mixture of crimes, some of which will have injury, some of which will have damage, some of which will have threats to individuals, and they will each have different or slightly better investigative opportunities depending on where they are and how they take place.
Yes.
Can we always be? Of course we can always be better, and that's what we strive for all the time.
Yeah. The figures that one clearly is going to be quoting for acid attack is going to be broken down in the same way as we break down knife crime. I mean, I have the figures in front of me. About a third of knife crime only. I I say only as a term, not to seek to minimise it, is a third of all knife crime. What, as far as acid attack is concerned, what proportion of acid attack relates to injury?
About 63% of that.
Much higher, therefore, than knife crime. Okay. Again, related to this spate or reported acid offences, there's been a kind of knee-jerk reaction saying that punishment should be higher. The debate in the House of Commons, I think it was in Westminster Hall, said that the sanction should be greater and that there is somehow an intelligence amongst criminals to say we're more likely to get away with it and we get a lighter sentence in the unlikely event of us being caught if we use acid. Isn't there a problem with increasing the possible punishments that in fact the courts may not do it? Can I draw your attention to the fact that it used to be 2 strikes and you were out for knife crime? You recall, if there were 2 knife offences, you got a custodial sentence, no messing, and of course that never actually happened. And I wonder if there's going to be a suggestion that we crack down hard on acid attacks and that there should be a stiffer sentence, by which I read custodial sentences, do you not think it likely that those sentences will not actually be implemented in the way that they were not implemented with knife crime?
Well, it's not my role to do judicial outcomes,
of course
but,
not.
but in terms of the points you made, I think it's entirely appropriate that when a new or emerging or a change happens in crime patterns, that one of the things you do is keep open the chance that you might need to review legislation. In the same way that we've talked about with things like social media and those sorts of things. Otherwise, personal view, I don't see the law as some sort of ossified thing that sits here, often decided in the 1800s, that can't change for the 21st century. You know, there are some things and substances here which aren't even defined by law. At least we should say, well, go on then, let's have a look. Now, it might be that when the review's done, people say, no, actually, the sentencing powers are there, the legal framework covers this, you don't need a code around sales, or if it is, it's a voluntary code, the industry wants to do, that's entirely appropriate. But I think when you get something like that happen as a spike that catches people's attention, in the same way we're doing work with the moped industry around moped-enabled crime in London, I think it'd be somehow personal. I think we ought to do that. I think that's part of what we're here to do.
I accept that, and I'm pleased to hear it. On a related point, Assemblymember Hall asked the Deputy Mayor about the fact that there was no quantifying in terms of an actual figure in relation to dealing with knife crime. I wonder if you think it will be appropriate, and then I will ask the Deputy Mayor this, if we can actually have a hard figure for setting a target for increasing sanction detection, rather than simply saying we hope to increase sanction detection. The only figure that we have given to us does relate to what seems to me to be a steep decline in sanction detection for knife crime, particularly as the volume of knife crime has increased. Do you think it will be appropriate for there to be a numerical target for increasing sanction detection for these kind of offences?
Do I think it'd be I think the difficulty you get, and I think you've rehearsed this well and truly.
I go to, yes.
Yeah, I think you've well and truly rehearsed this. What would you set as is 1% better good? Is 10%, 20%? I think you've got to keep striving to make these outcomes get better outcomes around all of these offences, and raise sanction detection rates. There is not a target for them, and some of the things, particularly around sanction detection rates, because you then get into the vexed area, because I think it's really important on this, can I include cautions in that? Can I include other alternative disposals with a young child who sprays acid over a desk at school and then they're dealt with through a disposal. Does that count?
Well, that's the kind of discussion we've had over the definition of sanction detection for as long as I can remember.
But therein lies some of the risks around, say, because, and it goes back, and the classic one that most police officers will know, so cannabis and cannabis street possession is one of the quickest ways to drive up sanction detection rates across a force.
Of course, but I'm relating this to a specific crime. Can I ask you, Deputy Mayor, on this one, a very simple one in relation to this is to say that you would restore the sanction detection rate, and since we're not precisely sure what it is in relation to acid attacks on knife crime, to the figure that it was 3 years ago. That will be a very simple numerical thing, and on the face of it, quite easy.
What I'm interested in is ensuring that the police are doing absolutely their best in catching the people that are causing knife crime and committing knife crime on the streets. I'm interested in that, not just in terms of sanction detections, but actually what the outcome of those prosecutions are. That's what I'm interested in, what we'll be analysing and assessing going forward. That we're not only reducing knife crime, but we are increasing the numbers of those who are perpetrating knife crime on the streets, and making sure that there are successful outcomes to that. Sanction detection rates are, as I'm sure you've rehearsed many times at this committee before, there are inherent difficulties within that, and there can be perverse incentives within that as well.
What you have said is motherhood and apple pie, but the man in the street, precisely as Assembly Member Hall has said, actually understands a figure, and by simply, as I have suggested, going back to what indeed was not an awfully good figure 3 years ago for sanction detection for knife crime, but at least it was a lot better than it is now. That's quite an easy one for people to understand. And we're quite an easy target, irrespective of the nuances of what is sanction detection.
What I'm interested in is making sure that the police are doing as an effective job as possible in catching those who are perpetrating knife crime, and making sure that that is, in terms of successful outcomes in prosecutions, that increases. And I think that's what people will understand on the outside as well. There are inherent difficulties and problems around some of the issues around sanction detection rates, setting plucking numerical targets out of the air. We're not going to agree on this,
no, we're not.
And I am going to continue
to make sure that we hold... this 2 or 3 times already, I think. We've rehearsed this too.
I gave it a go.
I gave it a go.
Let's move on. All I'd advise, I wish when I was in the commercial world, I had a boss like you who was quite as progressive about targeting, because I had lots of figures. Anyway, look, let's move on quickly. Andrew, come on.
Thank you. A few points, going back to acid attacks and specifically. Talking about social media, I mean, one thing that strikes me is perhaps it might be an idea for the police, LAS and LFB together to put out some first aid advice if people are squirted with acid on social media. I mean, I understand that you douse everything with water is the basic advice, but that might be helpful, because either if you're a victim you don't know what to do, or you may be in a panic, or you may witness it and be able to do something, and it doesn't have to come from the police. It could come from all emergency services, and I think that would be important.
That's a good idea. I think that's one of the ones, looking at one of the bullet points, that people are doing, but I will check for you, because it's a really good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think the real risk here is that we've got something that's turning into a fashionable crime, like moped crime suddenly went through the roof and so forth, and you make the point about this being a domestic item in the same way that many knives are domestic items. There's a perfectly legitimate reason to have this stuff around home. One thing I was going to ask you was whether, when you come across these crimes, people are decanting the chemicals into other containers, because I know when I try and get into the bleach at home, you've got these pressed down things, it takes forever to get into them. And if you're a victim, you'd run a mile by the time somebody got the top off. So are people decanting the chemicals?
Usually it's carried in something other than the thing it would originally have arrived in.
So one aspect perhaps you ought to be looking at in terms of law is whether there's a lawful excuse to take something out of its official container.
Absolutely.
Which will have all the safety warnings on it, and into something else. And what excuse can you have for pouring bleach into a squeezy bottle or something, particularly on a moped?
No, and that you're absolutely, that is some of the area to be looked at in terms of the legislative work, even down to, it goes to show an intent if you move it from one container to another, and it starts to help to build the picture of what its use is for.
And again, it comes down to the design of the containers, the official containers. If they're large, then you can't carry them around anyway.
Yeah.
And the other question I was going to ask you was to what extent the assailants are known to the victims.
I don't have the data on that. I will try and see if we've got it for you in the data set.
And that may fit into gang crime, or
Yeah.
it may fit into so-called honour crime, which
Yeah.
we know has been an issue in relation to certain interfamily attacks with acid.
No, I just checking my breakdown of 2016. I don't have the known. I'll find that for you.
I mean, it is important that we try and dig down to this as much as we can, because if it does suddenly become a fashionable thing instead of knives, well, we could end up with an epidemic, which we don't have at the moment.
No.
Although 400 odd crimes is a lot compared to the scale of some of the other crimes, like the way moped crimes
Yeah.
go off the roof or the number of knife crimes, it's still not a huge number, so people shouldn't get too alarmed in terms of the numbers, but it's something we want to make sure doesn't get out of hand.
And I think, as you covered in the opening point from your colleague, this is a crime that we have seen. This is not, whilst
Not new.
the focus on it is new at the moment, this is a crime that we've had there for many, many, many years.
There is a suggestion of it almost a phenomenon of an alignment between two phenomena, which is the moped crime and the acid attacks. This is not, they're not mutually exclusive, but there appears to be almost an alignment of both those crimes to a degree, on mopeds using acid as a weapon of...
Yeah, I think so. Some of the ones we've seen recently have involved the use of the moped.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I'm not certainly from the data I've seen, they're not all linked with two-wheel vehicles.
No.
But I get the
We're going to
point.
get a squeezy bottle on a scooter, you might just squirt on yourself or somebody else would have thought.
Okay, all right. Ulmesh, you want to come
Chair,
in?
I'm conscious of the time, so
Yeah,
I'll try to be as brief as possible.
yeah.
3 or 4 points, again, mainly to you, Deputy Commissioner. Although Sophie, you may wish to come in as well. Firstly, I think we should let you know that Stephen Timms sent us his thoughts on this issue with reference to the debate in Parliament. He stressed 2 points, 2 specific changes in the law, which the Home Office Minister Sarah Newton assured him that the review by the Home Secretary would take both points into account. The first point I think we already touched upon about carrying acid an offence. The second point, I don't think we touched on that, so perhaps I could have your thoughts about that sulfuric acid in particular, and some of the more strongest stuff, that one should require a license to purchase such items. And that's the position of the British Retail Consortium and the Association for Convenience Stores as well. So perhaps would you consider adding the weight of the Met and also Sophie as Deputy Mayor to this review by the Home Secretary?
Yeah. Absolutely. All happy to consider that. Yeah.
I mean, again, I think it was the Commissioner who said in the Evening Standard last week that she could see no reason why a normal person would actually want to buy sulfuric acid, which not only can dissolve your skin, but can also dissolve one's bones. Secondly, I think you did tell me that Commander Musker has been tasked with coordinating...
He's coordinating particularly across the East boroughs at the moment. Yeah.
I wanted to get that in the public domain, just to send a message back
Absolutely.
to Londoners, and particularly East Londoners, that the police are taking this seriously, and I know you are. Which brings me to the third point. The local commanders can actually put in record Chief Superintendent Sue Williams and Chief Superintendent Eddie Lecken have been meeting community groups and have been doing a really good job.
Thank you.
And I've attended public meetings with Eddie Lecken last week, a packed public meeting, and he brought his whole team along, including the investigating officer who's leading the investigation into the Beckton attack. So I think it's important that through us, the message does go to Londoners that the police, particularly East London, are taking this very seriously.
Thank you.
And which brings me to the last point. We talked about the role of social media in promoting rumours or how social media is abused. I don't know how many people actually tune in to watch us debating this issue. So what message can I take from you, Deputy Commissioner, when I get onto my phone at the end of this session? What positive message can I send out through my Twitter to Londoners, and particularly East Londoners, about what you are doing about these attacks?
That we are taking this seriously, that there is a focus from officers at both a local level but also at a national level to try to look at new long-term prevention solutions to this problem. So we're absolutely focused on dealing with it as it is now and making arrests and dealing with it through the criminal justice process. We know the long-term solution. This is a problem that can be designed out and prevented.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And to Sophie as well, thank you.
That one, Mish?
Yes, I got that.
That's a rather long tweet. Sorry, I couldn't get it.
We've got that out
I
there.
can't get it in 140
And I think
characters.
Sophie follows me. Perhaps you might wish to follow me as well, Deputy Commissioner.
Much excitement. I also am reassured that Commander Musker
Yeah.
is getting involved in it.
Absolutely.
Knowing Musker involved, that's reassuring for East Londoners that Commander Musker is involved.
And if you could send our appreciations to Stephen Timms as well for taking the trouble to send us a note. I'm sure you already got that in hand back with it.
Good. This is all turning into wonderful. Anyway, I won't say. So, moving on to the next set of questions, if I may, which is public access and engagement strategy, which I added to the agenda in the wake of the consultation draft strategy, which was only issued last week. The community and others have until early October to respond. So this is quite early in the process, but I think it's something that we really wanted to exercise ourselves around today. Particularly, we all have a clear interest in it. I certainly had an interest from the previous administration, and that's why I wanted to lead some questions around that. So there's two aspects to it. It's public access and then engagement with the community. So it's two parts to the whole. So my first question really to you, Deputy Mayor, is that in the consultation your quote is saying that the direction of travel is broadly settled. So can you just briefly kind of give us a context of that, bearing in mind you're putting it out for consultation? How does those two pieces sit together?
In the introduction of the strategy, at the bottom we do say that the direction of travel is broadly settled.
Yeah.
By that we mean that we have to, as everybody knows, we have to find significant savings. We are prioritising the front line and frontline officers, prioritising keeping as numbers as high as possible, but also the support and the equipment that they need. And in order to do that, we have to find this significant savings. And as part of that, we have, the direction of travel is around looking at the police estate and looking where we can make savings and to ensure that we've got that, we're prioritising the front line. But this is a consultation document. We are consulting with communities around the proposals within it, around closing, a significant number of front counters, around some of the swaps. There's 5 areas, 5 boroughs where there is a proposal to swap the 24-hour station. That is part of the consultation that's there. But also a consultation around how, what is the best way to improve and increase public engagement with the police via the Safer Neighbourhood Boards and the ward panels being there and the structure that we are committed to in terms of continuing, but how do we improve that and what else do the public feel is necessary to improve that engagement with the police? I
mean, I sense from the Commissioner's comments also that notwithstanding the financial challenges, there are recommendations, suggestions which are likely would have taken place in any case to improve the way that you engage with the community. Is that fair to say,
Yes.
Deputy?
Yes.
Yeah. So we will probably move towards this, notwithstanding the pressures around that. Talking about engagement, I'm pleased to say that, or to note actually on page 33, that MOPAC has developed increasingly strong and effective public engagement processes. So I take some pride in that. So we're in a relatively good place already, but I want to talk about Safer Neighbourhood Boards. Early on you mentioned, Deputy Mayor, that some phrasing that I used and got into trouble with the then Commissioner about holding the local borough commanders to account, one of the reasons for Safer Neighbourhood Boards. And on page 37, the 5 key aims of Safer Neighbourhood Boards, it doesn't actually mention that. And we seem to, in a way, have dropped that aspiration. This is probably one really for the Deputy Mayors. Do you still see the future of Safe Neighbourhood Boards as a mechanism to hold the local borough commanders to account around performance and activities in the borough?
Yes, I do. And
you do.
In terms of this consultation, we're looking, if that's something we need to look at, we will look at that.
Good,
And we'll
okay.
discuss that with Sophie.
It's not specific in the key aims, which I think was quite
Which is out
interesting.
for consultation.
Okay, that's fine, good. And I'll probably contribute towards that. You, something I'm very interested in particularly is about the demise of the contact points. And I think we would all agree, and I would agree, put my hand up and say I don't think contact points have worked, and I think the evidence is there. So you're moving away from the contact points and to DWO hubs. So you are committing to 2 officers and 1 PCSO in each ward, which is to be welcomed. And on the back of that increase in numbers, your way of engaging those teams with the local community, and also those teams, what I would say, parading in the morning, which is an issue Andrew often picks up upon, about the distance they have to travel, is the evolution of hubs. And you talk about 150 new hubs across London, which in my arithmetic is about 4, 5, 6 a borough. And those hubs are going to be out in the local communities, which I support, but I'd like it, perhaps either Deputy Commissioner or yourself, Sophie, a little bit more detail how you see that evolving, perhaps Craig or whoever.
By all means. So I see that as, this is something I know we've talked about before, and probably 3 or 4 years ago this issue came up about how can you get to a scenario where local ward-based officers can work in, probably on their patch, there's a fire station, there's a community centre, there's a whole range of facilities and buildings, some of which are underutilised. So if we just look at the 3 emergency services, we've done quite a lot of mapping in London across how the 3 emergency services could work differently together. And those are the sorts of opportunities that you can use to create some of these hubs. Now, we've discussed, and I think Assembly Member Dismal raised this before, so simple things like just making sure you can download your body-worn video in a place other than going back to the police station. So that's the desire and aspiration, to get to things that are shared, that can have shared usage, and we can actually operate from with other groups across London. And it will be different in different boroughs.
Because you'll remember the conversation we had going back 4 or 5 years. We had opportunities then to do.
Yes.
And actually at that stage, the Met pushed back against it.
Yeah. And I think some of it is also around, you'll remember during the, what I would call the first stage of estates transformation, we were pretty flat out doing a whole range of other things. It's about, some of this is also about bandwidth to be able to actually deliver them. Sometimes it's easy to say, oh, of course, yes, we'll do such and such, but actually we've actually got to, there's got to be some work behind it to deliver that in a way that works.
I'm also pleased to see quite a strong narrative around ward panels. Again, declaring interest, I'd chair my local one, which I didn't, the community should, but there you are. And I'd be interested, so a lot of this is predicated around strengthening the ward panels, I read. How do you see that extra support around ward panels out of the officers? What's your vision, Sophie, on ward panels?
Well, I said, previously, I think the structure of ward panels and safe neighbourhood boards is one that works. It's not consistent across London. There's some really good practice. There's some fantastic ward panels that have really good engagement, and there's some others that are pretty moribund. What we want to do through this consultation is continue that structure, but understand what is working and how do we lift everybody up to the level of, a much better level. That's what I want to see, and we need to discuss with safer neighbourhood boards and representatives around that, and the community about how that happens and how we can make that work better. But I also think that we can't get, I genuinely think we shouldn't just get stuck on, not stuck, that's the wrong phrase, but we shouldn't just think about community engagement being about meetings, about ward panels or safer neighbourhood boards, because actually the police, with dedicated ward officers, but not just the dedicated ward officers, are constantly engaging with the public. The question for me is, how good is that? How much is that fed back into the service in terms of service improvements or any gaps in service? But also the question for me is, how do we really engage, particularly with young people who they're not... I don't think I've ever been to a ward panel where we've really had, members of the young people turn up, and different. There are some questions around the diversity of some of the ward panels and the safer neighbourhood boards. And so the question for me is, yes, keep those structures, how to improve them, but also what else do we need to be doing, and how else do we ensure that there is that really good community engagement?
I mean, it's certainly the improvement and your ideas around IoT, the fact that the wards are on, officers are on Twitter, that is a way hopefully we can move forward to engaging younger people. And again, as Andrew's pointed out, there is an issue about the diversity of ward panels. So I think my borough is a prime example because of the demographic. Certain parts of the borough have ward panels that are pretty representative. Other parts of the borough, they're not well populated, they don't work, and that sort of stuff. So there's going to need some significant support around that. And just on boards again, what extra support will you be, again, you're talking quite strongly and positively about the Safe Neighbourhood boards, which is good. What other extra support will you be offering to those boards, if anything?
Well, we're already committed, and I've signed off the decision of £1 million of funding to the Safer Neighbourhood Boards. That will continue.
It's a continuation.
It's a continuation of that. I don't think this is all about resources. This is also about, you know, effective engagement locally, but it's also around really good use of, you know, some of the social media that can be used, and really just long-term engagement with the public. This isn't all to do with resources. This is about ensuring that, you know, we understand what does work and how do you get through to the community.
Yeah, because I think I would say this, but I think the boards have been a success. We've had a whole new generation of Londoners getting engaged, given of their time. I think that's a good thing. My last point before I bring Andrew in is going back to the front counters piece, which is about the commitment for 1 24-hour in most boroughs, or you'll say there are 2 or 3 boroughs where there's 2, but there are some closures around that, and I kind of get that. This will mean that some people will have to travel quite a long way to do that one thing. Now, I know less and less people use front counters, but how would you answer that charge that actually if you only have one in a borough, in larger boroughs, there's a lot of travelling time, and particularly some older people who may not be social media savvy, will want to make that trip? How do you answer that charge?
There is going to be, you know, we are out to consultation on closing front counters, and there's no bones about that, because we have to get those savings out. But alongside that, there is a very good strategy around improving access to the police via the telephone and via the internet. Only 8% of crimes in London at the moment are actually reported over front counters. There are other channels and other methods of reporting are being used and are increasing all the time. The Met's website has been relaunched and revamped, and is I think extremely user friendly. We have already, without any publicity, communication, or driving of people to use the website, the numbers of reports of crimes has already really increased over online, and the work that has been done to look at who, to talk to Londoners about how do you want to access the police, shows that many people do want to access the police and report crimes online. And what I've always been slightly concerned around some more vulnerable groups, what their access will be, but actually it's not showing that the elderly are much less likely to report online. They are saying in the similar volumes that they want to use online services, as we do in lots of other aspects of our lives, and as council services are also doing. But we have put out, we have said in this consultation document that the vast majority of Londoners will be within about either half an hour or 45 minutes travelling time to a 24-hour police station. That does leave about 3% that won't be. Consultation document asks the question: is this a serious concern? What might we be able to put in place alongside the telephone and the internet? Do we need to do something about it?
Londoners will use the telephone and the internet. They won't go to the station in the main. I mean, I had a station closed in my ward, and I didn't get one piece in my mailbox about it. My last point, you're going to close down virtually all the Safer Neighbourhood bases, some dozens across London. Now, there's some complications around that because they'll be on leases. So are you just going to, on day one, close them, depopulate them and mothball them? Or are you going to allow the leases to run? How's that? Because it's not quite as simple as that, is it really?
No, the detail of how you would do that is, for obvious reasons, not in the strategy, because they're all at different points on the lease.
Yeah.
So at various points, there are a number of options open to us on those. So around the safer neighbourhood basis, one of the decisions might be around where it is in the lease and the ongoing costs. So can you reduce some of the running costs? So while absolutely we would do this, as we've been quite clear, this is absolutely the way to go. There is the issue, of course, that we are absolutely trying to get the money out. That big picture stuff is still, it's about £170 million of identified savings over the next 4 years that we've identified, of which about half of it are around our estate. So we've got to keep driving those costs down. and that will be part of that debate and trade-off around those individual leases and when they're up for
And
renewal.
it's good tactically to move them away as quickly as possible, because otherwise you're going to have these
Differential
buildings that
service,
had
yeah.
Met Police on,
Yeah.
and nothing
Yeah,
and that's
absolutely.
not helpful.
No,
Sorry.
and as you know, we've been in that place before.
We
and
have
that's,
indeed.
That's not a good place.
Andrew, did you want to come in?
Yeah, and can I start off with neighbourhood boards and ward panels? I sit on both the neighbourhood boards in my 2 constituencies. And one of the issues that's come up regularly is their ability to advertise conventionally as well as on social media, and the money to do that. So, take Barnet for example, we have public meetings every so often, but there's no way they can actually advertise it beyond social media, which becomes a sort of a self-fulfilling problem, in that if you don't know it exists, how do you know to actually get involved with their social media output? So is something going to be done to enable Safe Neighbourhood boards to actually use conventional publicity for their public meetings as well as social media?
I've had that issue raised with me by Safe Neighbourhood boards as well, and what I have said to them is that we're not going to be providing a specific advertising pot of money within the allocations to Safe Neighbourhood boards, but we are willing to be flexible about how the allocations are being used. They need to come and talk to us about that. Yeah. And I have said that to the Safe Neighbourhood boards, and they've had that.
Yeah,
they should have had that message.
Well, I'm not sure they have. But,
No,
but it is a problem that, you know, the Safe Neighbourhood boards are not going to succeed in attracting a more diverse membership or attracting better audiences to public meetings or public discussions or consultation meetings if they can't tell people they're happening.
There is an issue around communication, and there's obviously the online, how they can do it online. We've said to Safe Neighbourhood boards we are willing to be flexible about the money that's being allocated, but we do want them, we allocate the money for projects and programmes for the safe, and they have run some incredibly good projects and programmes to prevent crime, and particularly some of them have done programmes around knife crime as well. That's where the money really should be spent. But I think part of this discussion should be, and I think part of I would hope comes out of this consultation, is how can Safer Neighbourhood boards work more closely with other organisations in the borough, such as the local authority, who are always engaging with everybody's engaging in the way that different ways, but engaging with the community. How can some of this be brought together so that we can actually get some of the safer neighbourhood materials out with the local authority, possibly materials as well as the policing materials? I don't think some of this is just about developing a pot of money. It is about coordination and working a little bit differently.
Well, certainly, there's a lot of very good projects going on across London, not just in my 2 boroughs. But the problem is people don't get to know about them. And if there isn't resources available for advertising conventionally, then you end up in that situation where people are just talking to each other. And that's my main concern about that. Going on to ward panels, in particular in relation to the merger in Camden and Islington, one of the issues that's come out from feedback I've been getting from the merger on the Pathfinder is that the ward panels, particularly in Camden, feel somewhat disengaged. They've not been able to communicate well with senior management, and more importantly, one of the things they found is that the response team priorities aren't matching the local ward priorities, and there seems to be a bit of a disconnect there as well. So I mean, that's another thing that's come out of the issues around the Pathfinders that needs to be addressed. I think I raised before with Craig at the plenary the problem about engagement of senior officers, but it's not just senior officers, it's also a disconnect between the priorities set at the ward panel level and borough stroke response level.
Okay, I'll take that back.
Yeah, on the front desk closures, how long do you think it's reasonable for someone to have to spend getting from where they live to the police station?
The question for me is what is the best way for people? How do people want to report crime, and when do they need to come into the a 24-hour police station? What we've said in this strategy is that we have mapped through modelling. We've mapped how long it takes on public transport, where if only one 24-hour police station is open in that borough. But as I said earlier, vast majority of the population, the communities, will be within 3/4 of an hour. There's about 3% of London that will be about within an hour. That does concern me. This consultation document is asking the question, does that, is that also, is it an issue? If it is an issue, what might we be able to do to overcome that? So, we have raised that as an issue within the document itself.
Well, I think it is an issue, particularly in outer London, particularly in Barnet, where you're going to up for closure is the Barnet Police Station. But following on from that, you're talking about reporting crime, and 20% of crimes dealt with on the phone or online, which means 80% isn't. But equally, what we haven't seen are numbers of people going to the police station for things other than reporting crime. And people do go to the police stations for all sorts of other reasons as well, apart from reporting crime. Is that featuring in what you're looking at?
Yeah, the discussions that we've had around the police stations and the proposed front counters, absolutely, we have that analysis of what else people are going to police stations for. Some of it's for directions, lost property, things that aren't police matters. So I'm afraid, we just one of those things. But we also need to understand, part of the discussions is to make sure that these proposals do not impact on custody, in any independent visitors going through, on the legal profession and how that might impact them. We do, that is part of the discussions and the conversations that will take place and have been taking place.
Yeah, I mean, so that people do go for, you take lost property, for example. If somebody finds a wallet in the street, the good thing is to go and take it to the police station to report it. What else are they supposed to do with it other than pocket it? And if it's a choice of going to a local police station, which is quarter an hour, 20 minutes away, or spending an hour, that's something of a disincentive.
But even with those types of things, when you look at the footfall on the front counters, it's very, very small. Those front counters are not, they are not taking in lots and lots of lost property. We are looking at daily averages of, under 5. It's just not, we do have to make decisions based on the viability of keeping front counters open for a very, very small footfall. People are reducing, really are just decreasing the amount of, the numbers going through front counters has been decreasing, and we've got to take decisions, to get the savings out, to protect the front line. And I think that, I think the public will understand that and be able to think about, well, what are the other ways that we can report crime, and do we need, when we do go to a front counter, what is it we're needing from that front counter?
So what advice are we going to give people, for example, about how to report lost property?
We'll have to
Which
look
is the
at that.
example you gave.
Mm-hmm. I'll have to look at that.
So there's a
No,
whole...
no, do with TFL. If you find something in the street, what's that got to do with TFL?
You need some.
I use that as an example.
Yeah.
All the other things that people go to the police, is the example you gave, but all the other things that people go to the police station for.
No doubt that will figure strongly in the consultation.
But a really good example of how quickly service can move. So up to the end of 2016, a road traffic incident, you had to go into a police station, get a piece of paper, take it away, fill it in, take it back to the police station, and we posted it to our through internal mail to our place at Marlow House. That went online in March this year. 2/3 of that has moved online with no publicity, no push, no big campaign. It's just got reporting's going up, and as a result, more people are ending up with outcomes, i.e. something happens from it. So I think there are real examples to move services in a different way. I think we're all alive to they don't always work for anyone. I mean, the challenge, I think I've read somewhere, I don't know yours, how many 24/7 local authority points have you got in your borough?
How many?
How many?
I don't think you've got any.
So no one can access the local authority in your borough, and we have an argument about they should be able to access the police in more places.
Yeah,
I think that's probably unusually for you one of your weaker arguments, Craig, to be honest. But
I can tell you how many fire stations I've got. 24/7 fire stations.
Right, let's move on now.
Go on.
But it's not a weaker argument, because the reality is most of those services that they usually access, as the Deputy Mayor said, they've moved to online.
Yeah.
Certainly if I look at the borough I live in London, they've moved online. I can't go and have a face-to-face conversation about those services. They're online, or they're a telephone help centre. And actually, I get a better service than I would have gone driving up to the town hall and trying to ask about it.
Okay, I mean, we'll wait and see what comes out of the consultation. The last point I was going to make about the ward officer hubs, and this is following on from the question I asked you before, and you've now come up with this. not now, but this is the response to that about where people will parade from. Is the idea that the dedicated ward officer hubs won't start until they'll start before the closure of the other systems? And in other words, you won't put the new system in place.
Yeah.
You won't cancel the old system until the new system's in place.
So we're clear in the strategy that unless we've had the issue about leases, unless there are really prohibitively expensive leases, we will not close the safer neighbourhood bases until the local hubs have been put in place.
Right. Well, that's an important reassurance.
Caroline?
Yes, just a few small bits. With this, is this a continuation, really, of the work under the previous administration? Because I recall the previous Deputy Mayor talking about his aim was for one 24/7 police station in every borough. So is this really continuing that work?
We've had to continue looking at the estates because we're having to get the savings out. So yes, we have had that. Some of the, it is a continuation of reviewing the properties of the Met to make sure that they are, as we are using the resources efficiently and effectively. And that does mean that we've had to come out with this consultation around closing a significant number of front counters.
So this information, Craig, that you've pulled together in your document, was this sort of information that was before the previous Deputy Mayor?
Well, so there's new data. It is new data. We've been working on, and I think when we spoke, way back in 2012, we were talking about an estate strategy. There's another iteration worked on an estate strategy. So these are continuations of proposals around how do you get from a situation where we had an organisation with lots and lots of buildings and estate all over London to something where you can get the stuff that we all want to keep for the long term, fit for purpose for the people who work and use it, and fit for purpose for Londoners.
Okay, and in terms of the consultation, I recall the last Deputy Mayor going out on a big roadshow to every borough in London, doing 2 meetings per evening. Is that something you're going to be doing, Sophie, as part of this consultation?
Consultation is going to run for 12 weeks. The Metropolitan Police are putting in place plans to do local consultation around that and do local public consultation where the public, communities can come, see what the proposals are, discuss those proposals. MOPAC will be part of those consultations, and we are also making ourselves available to, for anybody who wishes to come and discuss that as well.
So will you be going out to each of these borough consultation events?
I will go to some of them, but I won't be going to all of them.
Okay. And in terms of the hubs that are talked about, when I look through the lists and lists of places you're going to be trying to dispose of, there's a number of them that are called partnerships. You've already got places in things like libraries, hospitals, shopping centres, stations. They're exactly the sort of place I'd have thought these hubs would be. Will you not be picking out some of these and make them your newly branded hubs?
Go on. No, sorry.
Seems strange, you're closing a lot and then you would be setting up new ones.
We're not closing everything wholesale and then setting up new ones. Absolutely, where there are already places, contact points where it's appropriate to be using them and they're close enough to the wards, they will continue to be used. We're not closing every single one. Some of them will be kept, will be there for the dedicated ward officers to start the day and end the day at. So we're not doing a wholesale change.
So some of them in this list won't close. They'll become hubs.
The list will be those that are up for proposal for closure.
Right. So there are other ones that you're keeping that aren't listed. Okay. And in terms of best practice and consultation, have you had this document, looked through in terms of that? Because I have to say, there's leading questions and there's leading questions. So a question that says, do you agree it's right for the Met Police Service to prioritise police officers over poorly used front counters? I mean, there's no objectivity in these questions. Do you not think that's, a bit unfortunate? I mean, you make your case, you then say, do you agree we've got the right priorities? Do you not see these as leading questions?
I think they're appropriate questions, and there's plenty of scope for people to put comments on, in terms of responding. They're questions that have been put there. We're out to consultation. We'll be going and talking to people about it. It's a consultation document, and we want and are encouraging people to give their views on what they think about the proposals.
I'm sure it doesn't really meet, best practice guidelines. My final question is a specific one. I notice in here Southwark Police Station is up for closure. Only a few years ago, Southwark had huge investment in their cell provision at the back, linked to terrorist suspects. What's going to happen to that provision and that huge investment that went in really in the last few years?
I think part of this is around closure of a front counter does not necessarily mean we're closing the whole building. So the majority of the buildings where there are front counter will be closed and sold, but actually I think I'd have to look into Southwark in particular, is whether it's up for disposal will be the issue. It's the front counters that we're talking about closing here.
Yeah, I think it was, from memory.
Let me have a look.
I'm just looking.
No, that's it. That is the closure of the front
It's the front counter.
front counter. It's not got a cross against it to dispose of.
Right, so it's not going, so it's just the front counter is closing, but you're still going to have it as a police base and
Yes.
you're going to have those
Yeah.
cells. Okay, I just thought that was so recent.
No,
Yeah.
fair enough.
I just thought it seemed a strange
But I
decision.
think your question raises a really important point, and some of the conversations we've had with London media have really been around that point. I think it's why it's important this is around access and engagement, because there's a danger sometimes when you talk about closure, people think the police are leaving the area. It's not. This is some of the local service that is through the front counter.
Okay, thank you.
We've got one more question. My only point, I think, as someone who joined the Deputy Mayor on his road shows, and Craig, you were there,
Yeah.
I do commend Deputy Mayor that you do get out and join the consultations, and then you can talk to the community face to face. Ulmesh.
Chair, Deputy Mayor, the Chair asked you about the challenges of policing what he called the larger boroughs with one 24/7 police station. But I don't think it's just a question of geography. There's also the issue of demographics and population growth. Now, I know this is a difficult one because every borough will make its own special case. But look at a borough like Barking and Dagenham, which geographically is quite a huge borough, very large borough. But also, if you look at the developments that are taking place along the river, Barking Riverside, 10,000 homes, that's just one development. Other developments, Beam Park, going all the way out into Essex, and huge population growth projections. What element does that play in your thinking, looking into the future? John Credis, the local MP for Dagenham, has launched a campaign to save Dagenham Police Station, and I'm sure he'll be getting representations from lots of people. But surely there is a case somewhere for looking at ahead over the next 10, 20 years, because once decisions are made, they are made. And 10 years on, people are left regretting what really should have, with hindsight, what should have been done. But let's say population growth, demographic changes, huge developments. I mean, Stratford is another example, and Westfields and Stratford is the busiest transport hub in the country and probably one of the busiest in Europe.
I think, this is part of this, it's part of a wider question, isn't it? That for what do people use the front counters for, and how often do they go? We've had that population growth, and London has been growing, and we know in the east of London that have had that population growth, but we are seeing a decrease in the numbers of people that are going into the front counters to report crime. So, in terms of it being a principle that you have a 24-hour police station where the biggest, where there's population growth, that isn't how people are reporting crime. The increase in reporting is coming over the telephone and online. The 24-hour police station, and as we've discussed already, in a borough, for me, it's a question of, what is the appropriate, what's appropriate in terms of travel distance, how accessible it is, and to make sure that those are the things that have been factored in terms of the principles and taking the decisions around which front counters should be put up for, part of this consultation should be put up for closure.
Okay.
And just if I may, to pick up on that point and reassure, so as part of the development of the wider estate strategy, the 10, 20-year horizon that comes from colleagues in this building is fed into that. So where is the population growth going to be in London? You highlight a few developments. Other people would talk about Nine Elms and the bit just south of the river. We do plot all of those and then look at services, as I know colleagues in fire and elsewhere do. How can we service that? I suspect as you go forward, probably 5, 10 years out, you'll be looking at new locations in parts of East London where you will want to grow services. That's a reality. I'm not sure you would want to grow front counters again. It seems to be a service that people have, by choice, started to step away from. You might grow some different services.
Okay. Right. Conscious of time, we're now moving to the last question, the rescheduled last question, which is Notting Hill Carnival. It's timely because this is the last Q&A before Carnival.
I'll withdraw, Chair.
Yeah, and I know you'll join. Off you go. We had a very helpful briefing yesterday morning, which some members were there, which was very useful, an informal briefing. And clearly this is in the context of the independent study and the crowd management report redacted that has been issued to us. So we wanted to satisfy ourselves as a committee about where we were on Carnival, and I think leading the questions, yeah, Susan, you're leading these.
This is to the Deputy Mayor. Last year you commissioned a study of crowd dynamics at Carnival, which was completed in March of this year. It was, however, supposed to be completed in January, so can you explain to us why it was delayed?
So just from the start, it was the Notting Hill Strategic Partnership Group that commissioned the study. It did go via MOPAC and the decision was on the MOPAC website, but it was a joint decision of all those partners who were part of that Strategic Partnership Group to commission the study because of the concerns that came out of Notting Hill Carnival, last year's Notting Hill Carnival around crowd safety. It's, the final report was not until March, but as you know, members will have heard from yesterday's briefing, that doesn't mean that crowd dynamics, what they call crowd dynamics, went away, squirreled away, wrote a report and then produced it in March. It was an iterative process whereby they analysed the evidence, went back to the partners, went back to the police and the local authorities to say, look, this is the type of the way that we're going. Is this going to work? Is it going to make the difference? So it was in the development of the final report, there was those discussions to make sure that it was the right direction, that it was going to work, and there was that discussion taking place, and from the experts as well, and those that are delivering it.
So you don't believe that the delay has caused any problems with the organisation?
I think we are in a much, much better place in the development of the plans to ensure safety of those visitors that are going to the Notting Hill Carnival than we were this time last year. And because of the iterative process of crowd dynamics, because of the strength of the partnership group in being committed to driving through changes, we are in a much, much better place. There is an event management company that is in place, working very closely with all partners, the Trust, the Notting Hill Carnival Trust, the police and the local authorities. So I don't think that the final report being delivered in March means that we're in any way behind in terms of preparations for this year's Notting Hill Carnival.
Okay, do you know the reasons for the delay?
I've explained that it's not that there was a delay, it's just that in terms of developing the actual report, that the crowd dynamics went back and forward to ensure that there was, the expertise and it was going to work. It was an iterative process.
I accept that, but it did say that it would be through in January, which is why I asked the question. The report highlights the data gaps in the understanding of Carnival and the behaviours that occur within it. What impact has this had on planning for safety at the Carnival, and how do the partners intend for this to be addressed?
So as I said, I think we're in a good place in terms of planning for to make Carnival as safe as possible. In terms of the data and elements that may need to be put in place, that this report isn't just for the 2017 Carnival. It has recommendations going forward which will be put in place as well. There will also obviously be after the Carnival this year, through the Strategic Partnership Group, a very good look at this year's Carnival and what else needs to happen to make sure that its safety of those visiting is always being improved.
And of course the police, yes. Based on this work, what's the big difference at this Carnival that will improve safety?
The recommendations within the Crowd Dynamics report has looked at looking at a reduction in the number of sound systems, some changes to the Carnival route, and some timings of the Carnival to increase safety. I think a really major part of the recommendations which has happened is there being an event management company being put in place to really ensure that where there are, those recommendations are driven through, the management on the day will be much stronger and more robust as well.
So you have confidence in the management.
So that's me. Do apologise.
The strategic
Sorry,
partnership, I think it's important that in terms of management of the Notting Hill Carnival, this is an issue for all those that are on the strategic partnership group. Chief Executive MOPAC does chair that strategic partnership group. My understanding is the Metropolitan Police are satisfied in terms of the preparation that we are in a much better place than we were last year.
Okay. Deputy Commissioner, does this report adequately deal with the concerns and fears that the Met has in respect to the Carnival?
I think as the Deputy Mayor outlined, I think it's made a big step forward. Let's not underestimate it. It's still a very challenging policing operation. That's why we put 6,000 to 7,000 people out on both the Saturday and the Monday. We do that because it's a huge event. When you look at it, there are 4 key areas we always look at. So the work around crowd dynamics, the issues around violence at the event, the CT threat obviously has changed quite dramatically, so the counter-terrorism threat. So we've done a lot of work around vehicle mitigation and those sorts of things, and the involvement of a security officer and security advice. And then probably the new one for this year that we're all trying to work through, and people generally are trying to work through, is what is the impact of Grenfell? It's just off the footprint of Carnival. How will that affect both the event and people and people coming to the event? So we're all trying to work through what that means. I think that presents some opportunities to remember what took place, but absolutely we are looking at all of those, and I'm comfortable that really good people are sitting around a table talking about where this goes. But on the wider point, I think as the Deputy Mayor covered, this should be seen as one step on a journey. And 2017 is one step on a journey. This is not an event that looks like New Year's Eve yet. It doesn't look with that sort of control around it. You know, when you look at the comparator events, we've got to get to a position where we can see this as one step on a journey. As I absolutely say, it's a really good step forward. The strength of having an event management company, some of the really good stuff they're doing around marshalling floats, and being very clear, if you're not there at this time, you're not joining the event, that's just really good practice stuff that they're putting in place.
Yes, the report I see didn't consider crime at the Carnival. Do you think that would have been helpful to have considered crime?
Well, I think to some extent we're doing that. I think that the particular expertise we had here, if you remember last year, one of the things we discussed was the challenges of crushing and just the sheer volume. So crowd dynamics, that's their particular area of specialism, looking at how crowds manage, how crowds move, and that sort of thing. I mean, the crime challenges are very much, we're absolutely clear they're ours, that's part of it. We have a much longer crime plan that Martin Hewitt and the team are doing in relation to the lead up to Carnival. But no, that absolutely remains a challenge for us. If you remember last year's events with the impact of particularly gang activity and stabbings, that's what we're trying to mitigate.
Yes, okay, thank you.
It was the challenge that we informally placed in front of Martin yesterday, because he was reassuring ourselves about the plan that the Met have in anticipation. My challenge was, well, if we had this conversation a year ago, you may have said the same thing. In last year's Carnival, we saw increasing amounts of violence, but we were reassured that there's a comprehensive plan. But I'm sure Martin was. You've got to be realistic about what guarantees you can give in an event where I go back to the point. When we deploy 6,000 and 7,000 officers, it's because we know we're dealing with a risky public situation. Now, we want it to be absolutely peaceful. We want it to be a safe and peaceful event, and we're making huge progress in that direction. But we have contingencies. Yeah, and we heard, talking about the Grenfell influence, we heard yesterday that there may be an aspiration to acknowledge and respect Grenfell.
And I think,
without going into detail, during the course of Carnival, which is... And we're moving now to the event management company. Sorry, did you want to come in? Because I know your question was taken, but I have another one.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a number of questions, but Assembly Member Hall raised those issues. So I'll just stick to one specific question, which is the underreporting of crime, and particularly crimes of a sexual nature. So last year when the Chair and I, we walked around the Carnival with the then MP, Victoria Borthwick, we met 2 or 3 women, for instance, who are local residents, and who made a number of allegations. Now, I know it's very difficult, but there's no excuse at all for what we heard, allegations of groping, etc. Now, what can we do to encourage more reporting? I would the focus remains solely on gang violence, and I'm not dismissing that. But, as I say, just because there's large movements of people, we cannot simply allow that as an excuse.
No, and I think we spoke quite a lot last year about the groping, the unwanted sexual touching. I urge people to report it. You know, that's why we've got officers there.
But perhaps in your messaging.
You know,
good point. Sure. No, I think that is important, and we'll make sure that happens.
Because we heard yesterday morning that the messaging going out to the officers would be not to pass on by it, even though the offence is minor, because it was raised by Andrew Dismal yesterday morning, because he's a resident there, that's why he's left us, is that there's an enormous amount of antisocial behaviour, low-level crime that's very dispiriting for local residents, and it's reassuring to hear that the message was going out that you need to attend to that almost as much as the more serious offences. That was reassuring. Okay, great. Sian, are you next on?
Yes, I have one tiny question about the movement study. One of the recommendations was to carry out a street furniture audit. Obviously, the unnecessary street furniture is of enormous interest, actually, to walking campaigners and people who are interested in active travel. And I wondered if that could be published when it's done, so that people can see what's been found in terms of unnecessary street furniture and what plans are afoot to remove anything or rationalise it. That would be just of interest to other groups, I think.
Okay.
Thank you. And my questions are about the event management company. We've got a copy of the MOPAC decision for commissioning the crowd management study. But there isn't a similar decision given for the procurement of the event management company. I know that the strategic partnership also procured that jointly, but money went in and there isn't a decision published. So we've got a couple of questions about how the decision to appoint London Street Events was made. We know they're a new company, they feature a previous advisor to the Carnival, so we're just wondering if there was an open tender process there.
That decision was taken by the Strategic Partnership Group, and as you know, there was a decision around the funding that came from City Hall for that. But it's not just funding from City Hall that has supported that procurement of an events management company. Westminster City Council and Kensington and Chelsea have put money in as well, so that is a joint, and through the Strategic Partnership Group, that's how that decision was taken. It's not a decision that was taken by MOPAC.
Where is that decision reported?
Well, the decision for the money should be, I'm pretty sure there was a mayoral decision around the money that the City Hall was putting in. That will be reported through the usual mechanisms for reporting mayoral decisions. The Strategic Partnership Group are the people that took the decision around the event management company.
Is that procurement decision public anywhere for us to examine?
I don't know if they've put it on their own website, but it's, you know, it's not the only time that we will have funded people, giving, you know, in terms of public decisions around giving some funding, and those that have made, you know, those who are recipients of that funding have made some decisions around procurement and what they need in order to deliver what they've been funded for.
Okay. And as you know, things about procurement are quite sensitive issues at the moment.
But it was explained to us yesterday that because of speed of
I think
movement,
that's the main issue.
There was a limited procurement process, whatever that is.
So my next question, as a result of that, is will there be a more open, a longer, longer in advance tender process for the event management company for next year if that approach is still going to be carried on?
I think what we've got to do after the Notting Hill Carnival is, you know, and the Strategic Partnership Group have already factored this in and timetabled this in, is to look at what the lessons are learned, you know, not just in terms of what happens in Notting Hill, but we'll have to look about, you know, was the event management company, did it deliver on what it said it was going to deliver, and it will be the Strategic Partnership Group that will need to take a decision around how they go forward, go forward for the next year's Carnival around a professional event management group.
Okay, I mean, no reason to doubt that they wouldn't be effective, but obviously we want to make sure
I
that
doubt it.
this is all done above board.
Yeah. No, I understand that. Yeah.
And just can you outline the total cost of the event management
That was
company and roughly what they're going to deliver for that?
So they are already delivering in terms of, you know, the preparations and the discussions that we've had already about what's going to be different around the Notting Hill Carnival. I think the figure was £265,000. I'll just double check that.
That was the figure
Yeah,
given us
it was.
yesterday.
It's £265,000 for the event management company.
Okay.
Right, so we've talked a little bit about the responsibilities that they're taking on. What was reassuring again for us was an issue last year was who's responsible for Carnival. There wasn't one group or individual. There's good people of the trust, and we've had Pepe and others here. And I think it is a good step to have a company that is actually hired by the strategic partnership as trustees. So that was one question I had really was, are we moving in a better direction regarding responsibility for Carnival? We may not be in the exact place, but what would be your thoughts? You know the debate around that.
Yeah,
what's your thoughts around that?
I think literally as you summarised it, I think this is a first step, and it's a big step, and it is moving in the right direction. I think the strategic partnership have worked really well over this year to have those sorts of debates. I think it was Tuesday, so they probably mentioned this yesterday, they did some tabletops exercise, so we use some of our exercise capability to take people through what would you do if, because those are really important, that they do focus the mind and people go, right, so X has happened, what does that mean, and who is the lead authority? So, no, I think it's moving in the right direction, but I think, as everyone's been realistic about, there's still more work we'd all need to do going forward, but this is absolutely the right way to do it.
Because we heard again yesterday that obviously the management company are taking over some key controls and some key actions, but they needed very much the buy-in of the community behind the trust.
Yes, yeah.
And there was a decision-making process where they'd have the meeting and then Pepe and others will go back to their groupings and to get that. Has that kind of worked so far okay with the community behind the trust? Because this is a change of working practice, isn't it?
It is.
Do you feel it's working?
Yeah.
The outcomes have been the outcomes that have been needed, and as Craig has said, and I should reiterate, this is work in progress.
Indeed.
You know, as I've said, we're in a much better place than we were last year, but it's still very challenging, and it will be challenging as well. In terms of how that has worked, I think the outcomes of it, it's challenging. That's the only way to put it.
Okay. Well, I think we're bound to ask this last question.
This final question.
Do you want to ask that?
Yeah, I can do that as well. So the Minister for London's written to the Mayor to suggest that the GLA takes over responsibility for the Carnival in conjunction with the Trust. Is the Mayor minded to accept this proposal?
He also wrote to say that the Carnival should be moved, and we're very clear that it should not be moved.
Yes.
In terms of responsibility for the Carnival, there's no, at the moment, in terms of lots of different organisations are responsible. We certainly, from MOPAC, take responsibilities for the safety of Londoners, as the Metropolitan Police. We will continue to chair the strategic partnership group, and after the Carnival, we'll have to take stock as to what's the best way forward to make sure that we can ensure that Carnival becomes safer and safer every year.
Thank you.
Have you finished?
Sorry, Chair, very quickly, I'm just going to come back to the point I raised earlier about the underreporting of some offences. It's not just about positive messaging and but getting the message across that report all such allegations. I suspect many people don't bother reporting such offences because they feel nothing can be done about it. So can you take this aspect of Carnival into your operational planning as well?
Absolutely.
I'm sure you do, but again, I want to raise this because I know it's a difficult situation, thousands, tens of thousands of people and so on, but about how you can operationally deal with amongst many other priorities as well. So yes, reporting is important, but people, as I say, may not be reporting such serious offences because they feel that the huge crowds and so on, nothing's going to be done about it. Difficult. Deputy Commissioner, but I really got to put this on record.
Yeah, no, I absolutely on record, and also to reassure people, you can actually, in an environment like that, do something about it. CCTV, areas coming in, they are detectable crimes. So please, please tell us about them.
The CCTV covers the entire area. Sorry, Sue.
Yeah, Deputy Mayor, given that it is such a huge event in London, and the Mayor is responsible for London, and it's, and to quote you, Deputy Commissioner, a risky public situation, do you not think that the Mayor should stand up to the role and say, I will take responsibility for this?
The Strategic Partnership Group has worked very well and is delivering the outcomes that are needed.
No, I heard...
And there is the Notting Hill Trust. As I said, that is working, and it is.
So you don't think you should?
What I think, the Strategic Partnership Group is working, and the Notting Hill Trust is working with the Strategic Partnership Group. MOPAC will continue to play its part in the Strategic Partnership Group and chair it.
But the Mayor is supposed to be the leader of London. Should he not stand up and say, yes, I'll take responsibility for it?
Carnival is a fantastic thing that happens in London. No one organisation. There is the trust that has, is coordinating this. There is the Strategic Partnership Group, and that is working, and we will continue to make sure that that does work.
Can I just ask the Deputy Commissioner, can you remind me, please, I've forgotten, just how much does this cost the police to deal with?
Last year, I would be guessing the exact figure for you, so I'll get you the figure, but it's in the region of £6 to £7 million. It's one of the biggest calls on our overtime budget through the year. Again, just on a practical point, because it's a bank holiday.
Thank you.
Yeah, the cost is around 7.
Yeah, it's about
7
7.2 from memory last year.
£7.2 million.
Something like that, but I'll get you the exact figure.
That would be helpful, thank you.
Chair, just to say that when we did our study and published a report, one of our recommendations was that the trust actually become much more commercially astute, professional, and look at ways of maximizing income. Some of the evidence that we heard, I certainly found it that it's the second biggest carnival in the world, and I think a lot of it was with due respect to people who are volunteers, was amateurish, and the potential for maximum income is there. Stating the obvious, but
I'm pleased yesterday it was commented that many of our recommendations were the basis of the review. I think that's a very fair point, because one of the strong recommendations was for the Carnival, which is a brand of itself, to be better at fundraising. I don't sense that's happened in time of this year, but that may well be for going forward. I mean, I would say very much, obviously, we look forward to a peaceful, successful, happy Carnival, and then once that's achieved, others will then sit down and look at what went right, what perhaps did go wrong, how again we can improve and take up other recommendations, not least the one that was referred to earlier. So I think we finished on those questions.
I think if we're putting in opinions, I mean, one of the conclusions of our report was very much that it was a community event and should remain such a thing. So, in terms of professionalising and all of that, there is something very unique about it, and we'll see that again this year, I think.
But the flip side, if I just may add to that, is one of the issues about legal responsibility. Yeah. So whilst we embrace the fact it's a community event, we still have a failure to identify someone who's legally responsible for things going right and indeed for things going wrong. And that's something we need to look at after August. Okay, thank you very much, guest, for your questions and
Chair.
attending. Can I ask the committee to note as a background the monthly report from MOPAC? Note the report and answers given by the Deputy Mayor today, and which we'll take forward. Item 7, can you please agree the updated work programme, agree the terms of reference for scoping scrutiny review of gun crime, women offenders in London, work to be done over the summer. Date of next meeting is Wednesday the 6th of September. For those I don't see out there, have a good summer.
Thank you.
GLA Chamber Sound. 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 GLA